Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find all of my work by going to porkinspolicyreview.com, and of course also by going to American Freedom Radio. Well, today we are joined by a guest that I have been meaning to have on the show, but when I found out that I was going to be doing the radio show, I said, "Oh well, this is perfect. Let's get you on for the radio show." And this is my guest is Brian Heiss. And Brian, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? Who is Brian Heiss?
Hey, Pierce, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I primarily have done public relations most of my career. I started out in D.C. doing public relations. Then I moved out to California, where I worked with the Junior Statesman Foundation, the Junior State of America, which is the largest nonprofit, nonpartisan civics organization for high school students, teaching them about politics and government. From there, I moved back to D.C., where I went to college, and I worked for iVillage.com. I was probably the only person to move from California to D.C. to go work for a .com company in the early 2000s. And there I was the head writer and communications director for iVillage.com's diversity best practices divisions, which I authored several white papers, comprehensive studies focused on best-in-class strategies for diversity and inclusion to help corporations move the needle towards inclusion. I wrote several speeches for the CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, as well as Miss America 2003. Then I moved on and I was a journalist. I worked for a company called Diversity Spectrum, where I interviewed the CEOs of some of the largest corporations, heads of professional sports leagues and teams, the stars of stage and screen, as well as government officials. In 2014, I authored a white paper about the Russian anti-gay laws and cutting through really the propaganda and really explaining what that law was about. And then in the spring of 2014, I moved on to something that's interested me since 1994, which is the OJ Simpson case. And I've always been fascinated by these elements that are hidden from history, things that you know happens but aren't really readily available to the public. And you find with the internet coming into being in the 90s, well, for the mainstream, for the consumer internet in the 90s, you'll find a lot of stuff that occurred in the 90s is really hard to find online. Mm-hmm. So I started out and I started an adventure that led me to the longest search in history, which is to try to get the Furhman Tapes, which is Mark Fuhrman was an LAPD detective who was played a role in the OJ Simpson case. He wasn't a good guy.
No, definitely not. And that is why I've invited Brian on the show, is to talk about his work, his research into the OJ trial and the case, particularly with Mark Fuhrman. Faithful listeners will know that I am very interested with the OJ Simpson case. I've done a lot of interviews with Stephen Singular, who's actually worked with the defense and is an amazing journalist, wrote probably the first major book, Legacy of Deception, which deals exclusively with Mark Fuhrman, racism, and a lot of the planting of evidence that went on during that. But Brian, you've got
your discussions with Stephen were really a master class in the case. I mean, they were phenomenal.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I know I've gotten a lot of people have gotten interested in the OJ Simpson case. I know because of those interviews, and Stephen is a fountain of knowledge. Just one of the coolest guys I've ever met. I literally emailed him out of the blue. When I first started reading his book, and he said, "Hey, here's my phone number. Give me a call. Let's talk." And he is just a really awesome guy, really interesting person, writes a lot of true crime. But the OJ book is probably his most famous book. He's also done quite a bit on the John Benet Ramsey case as well.
As well as the Colorado shooting. His book on the Colorado shooting, the movie theater shooting, got a lot of mainstream media attention.
Yes, it did. Yeah. And he's written he's written all sorts of. He wrote a book called Talk to Death, which is about Alan Berg, who was a I don't know, progressive or liberal radio host who was murdered by members of the Order, which is a neo-Nazi faction. And of course, that is how he got interested in Mark Furman, who was also a neo-Nazi and might have even actually been somewhat directly connected with the Order. And maybe that's a good place to start in terms of your research, Brian, because you've done a couple things. You've up on your Vimeo channel, you've got some really excellent recordings. You've got the actual the first police interview that OJ did with Van Adder and Lang. These are two of the lead detectives involved in this, who of course were guilty of a lot of I think Judge Ito said that Van Adder, he basically used legalese to say that he lied.
Reckless disregard for the truth.
Which is basically means he lied repeatedly.
About the detective's warrant application. He had a reckless disregard for the truth. Yeah, the LAPD interrogation of OJ Simpson has never been broadcast in full before. If anyone saw the OJ Made in America series, they do present an excerpt from the interrogation. They talk about we've got blood everywhere, we've got blood all over the place, but they leave out the most important part of this thing, which is OJ's response, which is, well, take my blood. Mm-hmm. And so I obtained the LAPD interrogation in an odd way. F. Lee Bailey had it up on his website for like a week a few years ago, and I just saved it and kept it in storage. And then I went back and listened to it this past year, and there are three things that stand out in the interrogation, which you can watch in the separate film. Three things that make you go about the OJ Simpson LAPD interrogation. On June 13th, 1994, at the time that OJ was being interrogated by the LAPD, there had been no media reports about the manner in which the people had been killed. And despite OJ repeatedly asking the detectives, they refused to tell him how the people were killed. And if you listen to it in that context, it's quite shocking. And then upon learning of the murders, OJ flies from Chicago to Los Angeles. He agrees to be interrogated by LAPD without his lawyers present. He goes in a car from his house in Rockingham. His house is called Rockingham, his estate, to LAPD's Parker Center in a car alone with the two detectives, and his lawyer went in a separate car. And he insists that LAPD take his blood. And then the other thing is, throughout the interrogation, again, the media hadn't reported where the bodies were found or how they were killed. There's only one point OJ makes repeatedly, which is, I haven't been in her house in over a week.
He also says, check my guns. He thinks that
take my guns.
Maybe she was shot. Yeah.
But the bodies were found out. So for those who don't know, the bodies were found outside the house. And he's going on and on about, I haven't been in her house. It's
No, if you listen back, it is one of those little pieces that I think people assume, I think in part because of that FX show that's come out, the way that they portray that particular interrogation is very different from how it actually played out. And of course, they only recreate little snippets, and of course, it's only when OJ sounds guilty. And of course, the way Cuba Gooding Jr. plays that part, he makes it sound like he is guilty, that he has something to hide. Whereas if you listen to the tapes, he's very open. He talks about their relationship. He mentions that he had been recently threatened, that someone was following him around. And as you said, he said, hey, take my blood. And then of course they did take his blood, 8 milliliters, I believe. Then which later it was reported, 1.5 milliliters was missing. And of course Van Adder, after they take his blood, he carries around the vial of OJ's blood. And then it later comes out, of course, a vial of Goldman and Nicole's blood for like 3 hours, wandering around Los Angeles with it.
One more little tidbit on the interrogation. If you listen to the entire 34 minutes, there's only one point that OJ gets kind of rattled. You can tell that this man is, he's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And that point is when he reveals that he's regifted this jewelry that he gave to Nicole, his ex-wife. She gave it back to him when they broke up, and he regifted it to his current girlfriend, Paula Barbieri. That's the one point in the entire interview that he gets rattled.
Right, yeah, and then he's like paranoid that they're going to tell her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I called this series Veritas is simply the definition of Veritas is truth, verity, a true right or proper condition or state, the real nature of a thing, correctness, actuality, that which is real. So essentially, what I've tried to do in this series is not tell you what to think, not tell you how to think, but just present the facts, present the information, document it so people can go back and check, and let them decide.
Yeah. Oh, and I think that's a major problem when you bring up the OJ trial. People do kind of glaze over. They instantly get into the, he's 100% guilty, or he's an angel, he did nothing wrong, this is all a plot against OJ. And we can get into this specifics as to our theories as to what might have actually transpired on the night of June 12th. But aside from that, looking at the evidence, I know that sounds so obvious, is rarely done.
It's never done. People go on emotion. Yeah. It's all emotion when people talk about the OJ case. It's emotion, and it's things that they've heard. It's phrases like the N-word, the race card.
Well, let's get into that again, because as you said on your Vimeo channel, you've got up for instance, the actual police interview. You've got some other little videos. You've got a really excellent timeline that I think we'll get onto a little bit later. But you also have your main documentary project, OJ Veritas, the Furhman Tapes, and this is I said this to you before, Brian, in one of our emails, that I think when you look at the OJ case, it's very easy to get mixed, to kind of get sidetracked with the race issue. And race did play a key factor, and I think it's impossible to deny that even if you think OJ is, completely guilty, race obviously factored into it. There's no way around it. But I think at times the issue of race can be kind of a distraction. It can be exploited by both sides of the discussion. But I think what you do with your film in particular is you show how does race factor into this, and you show that through the lens of Mark Fuhrman. And again, you sort of I think you encapsulate it so well that race isn't everything, but race is a factor. And Fuhrman's beliefs certainly factored into how this case unfolded and how
no doubt about it. Absolutely. I think that the first thing that people have to understand is, unless you were watching television at 11:30 a.m. Pacific on August 29th, 1995, you've never heard the Furhman Tapes.
Yes.
Let that sink in. You've heard about this stuff for over 2 decades, about Mark Fuhrman and the N-word and whatnot, but it was broadcast live on CNN, Court TV, and a few local stations, no national coverage on broadcast television. Never rebroadcast in 20-plus years. The Furhman Tapes that were played in court that morning, that August morning, have never been rebroadcast. You've only heard excerpts of the tapes, and frankly, the most sterile excerpts of the tapes.
Yeah.
And it's I don't get rattled quite easily. Words and whatnot don't really get me upset. However, after I obtained the Furhman Tapes and I heard them for the first time, it rattled me to the core. I couldn't believe what I'd heard, because what I was listening to was so different than what I'd been told that they were.
Oh, if you listen back to what was actually played in the courtroom, which there. So anyway, these tapes, for anyone that doesn't know, these are tapes that Laura Hart McKinney, who's a screenwriter, she was working on a screenplay called Men Against Women, and we'll get into what Men Against Women. I didn't even know that, really. You
didn't know that Men Against Women?
No,
was
I didn't know that MAW was like a real organization.
It was a real clandestine organization within LAPD, and one of the things that they would do is they would try to get women who had become police officers to stop being police officers. And they And when women that were being harassed, retaliated against them, they would do things like not provide backup at scenes where an officer that was female requested backup.
Because it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
Yeah. And Furman totally acknowledges that not only does this unit exist, that he's a member of it. Mm-hmm. And Laura Hart McKinney conducted interviews from 1985 all the way up until July 1994, so just before the trial actually takes place. And that's important. That's something. Keep that in the back of your mind.
But more importantly, what was the screenplay about, Pierce?
Oh well, it's about corruption. It's about it's
about women in the LAPD. It has nothing to do with race. There's not even a racial subplot. McKinney testifies to this at trial on September 5th, 1985, that there is no racial subplot to this film. So keep that in mind when you hear people say, "Oh, well, Mark Furman was just playing a role. He was play acting for a screenplay."
Right, and that's how he would later describe it as well. He would sort of say, various times when he's asked about, I was just I was relaying other information. I was telling people that I was working on this movie. But it's an important, and you mentioned that in the film. You have the Laura Hart McKinney say, well, no, race didn't have anything to do with this. So again, Furman is the one that wants to bring this up. But I like too the point you make about the excerpts. You heard like two little excerpts were played out. And correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but wasn't it like no one was present, or just the jury was present?
The jury only, and I do make a distinction in the film. I separated out with some title cards showing this is what the jury heard. And they didn't even hear in one case, they only heard a snippet of one full excerpt, which gives you a much different context when in the film you see the whole excerpt that was it was cut down to. But the jury only heard two excerpts that were the most sterile excerpts that in the entirety of the tapes.
Right. If you listen to them, you could almost I can see people making, well, maybe he was a little racist, but there's definitely, in the excerpts that they play, they are so sterile that you could somehow make a case that, well, okay, he was racist in the past. He used the N-word, but it wasn't.
One of the excerpts was, "We have no blank where I grew up," was one of the excerpts. And then the other is, "Black Muslims have killed a lot of policemen. Why do they live in that area?" McKinney asks. "That's where blank lives." Furman says. Those were the two excerpts the jury heard.
Right. So you think, okay, bit of a racist, but that's it. Now, what's amazing in your film is you get into some of the real specifics of this. And I think that the thing that I really took away from this is the way you juxtapose what is in these Furman tapes, which goes beyond just, Furman said horrific things. He talked about...
Let's lay it out. The Furman tapes are about police brutality, racial animosity, false arrests, coerced interrogations, police misconduct, racial and economic profiling, planting evidence, and the use of the chokehold.
Yeah, exactly. And you juxtapose all of those things with, this is, par for the course with the police. This is everything. Chokeholds, torture interrogations, planting evidence, stop and frisk. All of these things have become commonplace within, they've just become accepted. There's a great section, on the chokehold thing. Obviously, Eric Garner from here in New York City is murdered on camera, of course, and everybody gets away with it. You've got one of the tapes. Furman is, he's going on and complaining. I believe it's about the ACLU, and they won't let them do chokeholds anymore. And
the ACLU should be bombed, and everyone there should be killed. They're a cancer to society, is what Mark Furman explains as he's rallying against them using the chokehold, asking them to stop using the chokehold. I think there's the old Chris Rock joke that. Why is it that the WWF has more restrictions? The WWF or WWE banned the chokehold, yet the police department is still allowed to do it.
Yeah. No. And again, too, this is the disconnect. This is one of the disconnects that I think people see when they view the OJ case is they hear about planting evidence. Oh, but we don't really know that. Well, Furman talks endlessly about planting evidence.
Well, let's just go over the facts that in 1995, the County of Los Angeles settled a lawsuit brought about by Joseph Britton, who was a man that was arrested for robbing an ATM machine, and Furman shot him during the pursuit, planted a knife on him, and uttered "die, racial slur, die." And the LAPD settled this lawsuit. Joseph Britton got $100,000, so that happened. That's fact.
And that happened like near or during the trial, correct?
The settlement came during the trial because LAPD did not want Britton's lawyer to be able to depose Furman. As I have Britton's lawyers in the film saying, we had much more damning evidence than the Dream Team.
Mm.
But, to give it a greater context, to give this thing, I think that Peter Neufeld, who was Mr. Simpson's attorney, co-founder of the Innocence Project, sums it up best. He says, "There's a disparity of experience and consciousness between black and white Americans so enormous that the fact that police commit such injustices is so foreign to their experience and consciousness of white Americans that most of us just don't accept it."
Yeah.
And he's not wrong.
No. Oh, and it's only sort of kind of recently that there's been this sort of acceptance, I think, in the alternative media that, the police target everybody.
Personally, I believe that if you look at the whole, it's really more of a socioeconomic targeting, more than just a pure racial targeting.
Yeah, of course. No, of course. The elite
of these injustices. But, let this sink in. In the 15 years since 9/11, the total number of Americans that have been killed in the U.S. by terrorism, and I've been very generous in putting this number together, 78. In 2015, over 100 unarmed Americans were killed by law enforcement. One is a national crisis that they want to scare the world about. The other is, oh, that happened, oops.
Mm. Well, yeah, it's either one bad apple or secretly, well, it was that black guy did have a criminal record, so he must have been up to something. I think he smoked weed earlier that day.
And honestly, that's one of the problems with the media presentation, because they always seem to present these people, because frankly, if you're unarmed and you're killed by police, it doesn't matter what your background was, what happened in your past. We need to get to a mindset that a human life, no human life is more valuable than each other. I think as Cornel West says, whether it's a baby born in Palestine, a baby born in Israel, a baby born in Newtown, Connecticut, a baby born in South Central LA, no human life is more, all human life is precious.
Mm.
And until we as a society get to that mindset, we're not really going to see change, because, currently we have, you could turn to this network and hear, well, the police were absolutely in their right to shoot this man who, was reaching for his wallet or whatnot. And then you can turn to the other network and hear that the police are the worst thing in the world. Well, there's something that's true there, but why is it that always we're presented with victims that make it so easy for the media to use it to separate and divide us further, when these incidents should be bringing us together? We should have the same sort of compassion for someone that was unarmed, innocent, completely innocent, killed by the police, that we do for the officers in Dallas that were killed.
Mm. Oh, no, and it goes almost beyond a disconnect. It is this deliberate nature.
One of the reasons that I after I heard the Furhman tapes, that I wanted to really get this out in front of people was because, it's been 25 years since George Holliday filmed Rodney King being beaten by the LAPD. 25 years later, not much has really changed. However, you wonder if hearing the voice of a white police officer braggadociously talk about committing these violations of human rights to another American, maybe then we'll get it.
Yeah, no, and again, I think that's what's so important about your film. And let's let's explore this a little bit more, because I think we're still kind of not purposely, but we're still kind of giving Furman a pass here. This is a psychotic individual, and what he talks about in these tapes and his role, not only in again, he brags to McKinney about, there's a whole sequence where he's talking about, well, if you haven't been investigated by internal affairs, then you're not a real cop. It's good to be investigated. Then people will fear you. People will understand that you're part of that inner circle. He talks numerous things.
The most horrific quote, in my opinion, is when he's talking about, me and the guys in the 77, we were tight. We could have murdered people and gotten away with it. And then McKinney goes, I mean, the fact is you don't want to murder people. And without a pause, Furman goes, sure we do. We'd love to. Oh, Mark, you wouldn't want to be going around murdering people. And then he goes on to explain that, if he had the chance, he would take out, and he lists the people. It was pimps, drug dealers, and there was another.
Oh, yeah, something else. I got it written down somewhere. I got to look. I know, yeah.
And he's talking about, those are the worst group of people in the world. You should just murder them. And he's not kidding. And no. I think the power of hearing his voice on the tape, it just sinks in such a way that you can tell. I mean, much like when you hear the LAPD interrogation of OJ, you can tell, well, there's some, the nonverbal cues, the way that people answer, the tone, the response, the words that they choose are sometimes more powerful than exactly what they're saying. And with Furman, you listen to it and there's no question that this man was not play acting for a screenplay, that this is what this man believes to the core. This is a guy that kept a swastika on his desk at the LAPD. He drew a swastika on a fellow officer who had recently married a Jewish woman. When he got back from his honeymoon, he was greeted to a swastika drawn on his locker by Mark Furman. This is not a good
Who got
man.
away with it?
Completely got away.
They proved that his fingerprints were there. He bragged, oh yeah, of course I did it.
He would get away with all of his incidents time and again. Why? That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't think it was really the culture back then, but it was pretty well known what Furman believed. And it's sad that today, as we sit here, it's not as well known what Furman believes. Because after the trial, he was completely whitewashed by the media.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, well, he goes on Oprah's show. He's not a racist. And again, what does he do after, he goes to Sandpoint, Idaho, which is neo-Nazi central. This isn't even something that's disputed. This is a well-known refuge for neo-Nazis and LAPD officers. The same thing. He does the rounds on the TV shows like Oprah and other things. He's on Fox News. He's talking about race relations. He writes these great best-selling true crime books. And yeah, he's he's at the point now where he's not a racist according to the mainstream media.
Well, except he has a mask on. I think Marsha Clark said it best. I don't know what Mark Furman I'm dealing with right now when she refuses to give him a second chance, which is in the film, I allow Furman to have his explanation from an appearance he did on the Art Bell show in 1997. And then to impeach his explanation, I chose Chris Darden and Marsha Clark to do it because I thought that they would be the fairest. The fact of the matter is that for some reason, Mark Furman and Dominic Dunn got together and they went on this crusade against the Kennedys. And because of Dominic Dunn's vouching for the guy, Mark Furman was first hired. Well, he was first acquired. They didn't technically hire him because they weren't paying him to be the Good Morning America on ABC News, their correspondent for the Michael Skakel trial. And that didn't go well, so they never used him. And then within a year, CBS News and Court TV hired him, and then subsequently Fox News. So it's not like, it's not just a Fox thing, but for some reason he's been given this free pass, whereas, Paula Deen, Donald Sterling, Dog the Bounty Hunter,
yeah,
Hulk Hogan,
Michael Richards,
and Rodner Figueroa, Univision anchor, have been placed on Kramer Island, where people go when they're racist and whatnot. And the difference is between these people and Mark Fuhrman is Mark Fuhrman had the ability to really mess with your life, really take away your humanity, take away your freedoms, and he did that.
No,
he did that to people.
Yeah, and again bragged about it. Didn't hide it. You play back some of Laura Hart McKinney's some of the tapes with her friend who was assisting her, and I mean Furman is straight up, hostile to her. You don't know what it's like. You're just a stupid woman and blah blah blah. Don't tell me what you know because you haven't killed people and blah blah blah.
You can't know about it unless you've done it. Is one of the sequences where they're talking about how many people have you killed, dear? He asks her, and she goes, "Well, I haven't, but give me the opportunity, and I would." And he goes, "You don't know what it's like. You're talking blank. You sound like a blank talking blank." And he then goes, "You can't know about something until you've done it." And the difference is Furman hates everyone. Furman hates Mexicans, gays, lesbians, women, commanders in the LAPD, African Americans, people that aren't like Furman hates. And he, again, in this film about women in the LAPD, Furman goes on and on about taking people's liberties from them, removing their humanity, taking away their freedoms, and enjoying doing it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. He goes on and on about, anytime he sees an interracial couple, he pulls them over. He talks about that he can basically pull them over and plant evidence. One of the really scary things, and again, a trend that we've seen more and more with a lot of these police shootings, we see these cops shooting people in the back.
We should, as Furman said himself on the tapes, we should still be shooting people in the back. It's just that you have to hire people that are capable of doing that. Mm-hmm. Which I juxtapose over the Oscar Grant shooting.
Yeah, which is insane. I mean, that's really... you're talking about cops shooting people that are handcuffed in the back.
As Furman would say.
No other reason other than it just fulfills whatever. Again, too, Furman talking about there's 300 pages of just one internal affairs investigation.
Yeah, that was from the Hollenbach incident where...
Talk about that, Brian, because
two officers had been shot in, I believe it was 1977 in Hollenbach, which was a prominently Latino area of Los Angeles. And they didn't know who did the shooting. However, they essentially chose one of the apartments that they knew that young people lived in. And it was a guy and his brother and their girlfriend. And again, there's zero evidence. The guy whose name escapes me at the moment was upstairs sleeping with his girlfriend, and then his brother was downstairs. And, they're in their early 20s at the oldest. And the police pretty much burst in their door, Furman among them, and beat them to the point that there was blood everywhere, and I'm quoting, there was blood everywhere. There was blood coming down from the ceiling. There were pictures on the wall, and there was just blood flowing everywhere. We basically tortured them. We broke numerous bones in each one of their bodies. Their faces were just mush. And this is how Furman is explaining this Hollenbach incident. That is an actual incident that happened, well documented. In the film, there's a clip from CBS News of the interview that I feel awful because his name escapes me. And he's explaining, he said, that's exactly what happened to me. And again, there was a lawsuit against the LAPD that was ironically never settled. And there were no disciplinary action brought against Furman because, well, two cops had been shot, even though these two people who they beat until their faces turned to mush had nothing to do with the incident. Yeah, they were just chosen because, well, they fit a demographic. And Furman's talking about having to wash the blood off of his blue LA. At the time, he was a patrolman, and the blood off of his blue LAPD uniform and his badge, and then going out after they threw the victims down the stairs and arrested them. They put the victims in a car with officers that weren't involved in the beating, and then they took a hose and they were washing the blood off of their uniforms. And he's talking about, blood dripping down everywhere. And, when it gets light out, you can see the blood on the uniforms, and we had to get it. So the blood was off our uniforms enough so we could direct traffic. And when the chiefs came to the incident, because, again, 2 officers had been shot, they said, well, where are the suspects? And he said, I think some officers over there got them and brought them down to the station. So, he's playing a game. And then, he goes on to explain how there was an internal affairs investigation. There were people outside of Hollenbach Station chanting his name, and he was the last person to be questioned because the main suspect is always the last person to be questioned. And he didn't get anything, but the jailer at the county jail got something for some minor infraction that he did. He got a suspension.
I think with pay. So
yeah, well, of course. I think they're always with pay. Do you know Furman still collects a pension from the LAPD?
Yeah, no, it's insane.
I think it's upwards of $4,000 a month. There have been a few attempts to revoke his pension, but they've been unsuccessful. Again,
and it's not denied that he perjured himself. He lied under oath.
Technically, his retirement came, I believe, on August 20th, 1995 was his 20 years with the LAPD. So when he took the 5th, he was technically retired as a detective, and that's the loophole that they used to get out of having to lose his pension.
Right. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, there's always they always figure out something.
But he's gotten paid since. I mean, he wrote best-selling books. He had his own radio show. He's a Fox News contributor. He's lauded all over the place. And this is a man who's committed atrocities, just unspeakable atrocities.
Oh yeah, I mean he's definitely murdered people that we don't even know about. Gang members or drug dealers, and I'm sure innocent people too. I'll point out also a very interesting side note, but the Christopher Commission, which is the report on the Rodney King beating, that whole scandal, Furman is named as one of the 45 officers in that report, who is also promoted.
He would have, if he had one more infraction, he would have been among the, I think, 40-something officers that were listed as the worst of the worst among the Christopher Commission?
Yeah.
If he had one more infraction, he would have been among those officers.
And also a Sergeant Coons of the Canine Division was also involved in was also named in the Christopher Commission. And he, interestingly, is also at the Bundy crime scene in the early hours of June 13th when Furman is there.
And there were a lot of cops at the Bundy crime scene. And again, just talking about Furman and his lies, one of the most blatant lies, which Barry Scheck has pointed out, is that, the famous picture of Furman pointing at the glove at Bundy. It's the only picture that you'll see of the crime scene of where Nicole and Ron were murdered, where there's another person in it and someone's actually pointing in that picture. That's Mark Furman pointing at the glove that is at the crime scene. Now, they keep saying that there were 20 officers at the scene, so, there could have been 2 gloves there, there couldn't have been this, there couldn't have been that, because there were 20 officers at the scene. However, all those 20 officers also swore under oath that that picture of Mark Furman pointing at the glove was taken at 7:30 in the morning after Furman had been to OJ Simpson's home at Rockingham and discovered, quote unquote, the other glove that looked like the glove that resembled the glove at the crime scene. However, when the photographer, Rokar, they looked at his proofs, a photographer has proofs that back in the day before digital photography, you would get negatives of your photos. And they were done in such a way that, let's say you had 3 pictures in a row. Picture 1 picture 3, picture 2 had to be taken in between picture 1 and picture 3. That's just the way the camera worked. And the picture of Furman pointing at the glove was taken at 3:30 in the morning. 4:30 in the morning at night, before he even went to the Simpson home.
Mm-hmm.
Yet 20 officers swore up and down that picture was taken at 7 in the morning after he came back. So if they're going to cover about this, when this picture was taken, until the facts present the truth, you have to call into question everything else that they might have said or done. Because if 20 people are going to testify that, nope, that didn't happen until 7:30 in the morning after he got back from the other crime scene and found that glove, and in reality it happened at 4:30 in the morning, 3 hours beforehand, well, what's wrong here? Why are people lying?
Oh, I mean, why did Furman in his initial testimony say that he saw them, meaning 2 gloves?
Yes.
He didn't say, I saw the glove.
Furman is describing, he's being questioned by Dean Gerald Ullman of the University of Santa Clara, and he's questioning Furman at the preliminary hearing about his activities at the crime scene, and he's talking about there's an iron fence around, because where Nicole and Ron were killed, it was essentially a small caged-off area, is the best way to describe it. Would you describe it that way?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's very, with a lot of overgrown, anyone that's been to LA or, the expensive parts of LA, it's, it's one of these, it's actually quite small. Even OJ's, they called it his estate. It's pretty tiny.
Very true. Very true.
It's not big at all.
So Furman's
very overgrown with, plants and things like that.
He could have used a good landscaper. I agree. So Furman's talking about this crime scene, which again is like, let's say 10 feet by 5 feet, maybe. Those dimensions might be a little off. And he's talking about going around, and he says there's an iron fence, and through that iron fence, you could see the body of the other victim very clearly. So he's talking about being outside of the fence. He's on the other side of the fence, the side towards the street, not the side towards the house. And he's walking around that side of the fence, and he's saying that by the second victim's feet, I got close to the body and I could see them down at his feet. He's talking about finding the glove. I could see them down at his feet. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to testify that as soon as Cato Kellen, who was OJ's house guest, who was staying in a bungalow by on OJ's property, how he's interrogating him essentially, and he talks about hearing these 3 thumps on his air conditioner while he's on this phone call at about 10:45 at night, 10:45, I'm sorry, 10:45, and Furman stops him right there, and then he takes Cato off into the house where the other detectives are with OJ Simpson's daughter, because they were there because they thought there might be another victim, but they didn't go upstairs, where the other victim might have been. And he plants Cato at the bar, and then he goes off to investigate these 3 thumps that Cato heard, and suddenly he finds the glove. But he saw
no dirt on it.
But he saw them down at his feet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point about when he found the glove. There's no dirt on it, and the vegetation around the glove has not been rattled. There's no signs that someone either jumped over a 6-foot fence with all these branches there, and none of the leaves around it. There's no blood on any of the leaves, because obviously this person allegedly was dripping blood. And none of the leaves are, if you go outside and it's the fall, or there are a bunch of leaves on the ground, when you're walking, you're going to kick up some leaves. That area is going to be disturbed. Well, in this case, oddly, none.
Oh, and we should be clear, too, the assertion by the prosecution here is that OJ, and we'll get into this in the second hour in more detail, but that OJ somehow makes it back, and within like 5 minutes, runs 3 times, slamming his body into Cato's air conditioner, drops a glove. This is after he's already dropped another glove at the other crime scene. I guess crawls underneath it, and and just leaves the glove there. Can't find it.
No,
of course, there's no marks on OJ, There's no explanation as to why he would even go that way. And the air conditioner is situated in such a way against the gate, he would have had to have gone under it.
On your site later, there'll be a timeline available to your listeners that they could download, right? Mm-hmm. And it's essentially a magazine which goes step by step through the timeline of events of June 12, 1994. And on one of the pages, I have a picture of OJ Simpson's estate, which has arrows that point to exactly where everything was found and the path that he would have had to take to go there. And, logically, the path where the glove is found, if you look at where the car was parked, it really doesn't make a lot of sense.
Oh, no, none at all. None at all. I mean, they've also never explained what the thumps were. Pat
McKenna, who was an investigator for the defense team, a guy that I really respect, he has said that they'd gotten a lot of calls from HVAC, air conditioning people, that said it could have been the compressor on a in-wall air conditioner, that, the compressor could have and rattled, and that it could have been something as simple as that.
Yeah, no, I know that's actually an interesting point, because I know that that's something people in the research community and this will point to, and I've read that. Well, was that some sort of a warning or some sort of a signal? That hey, we did it. Whatever the event was that actually happened. But yeah, I wonder if it couldn't just be something as simple as that. I mean, let's face it too, Cato's not the sharpest tool in the shed. I
think the most insightful thing that I ever heard about Cato actually came from, communicated third hand from OJ Simpson, which is the defense team wanted to really examine Cato and really be hard on him and, give him a tough interrogation by the defense investigators. And OJ said, no, Cato will be honest.
Well, and he was the only. He was declared a hostile witness by Marcia Clark.
But there's isn't there something very telling about this guy that OJ says he's going to be honest. He's just going to tell the truth. That he doesn't have his defense want to get exactly what the guy's going to say. Form all of these stories with him. She said no, he's going to be honest. Don't go after him. He had nothing to do with this.
Yeah, no, for sure. And of course, Clark and others on the prosecution wanted to get into all sorts of other things, and Cato routinely refused on the stand. He said, and he basically said, I'll only talk about what I know. Yeah. That, we got burgers. I don't know quite where OJ was for part of this time, and I heard some weird noises, but that's it. I don't know anything else.
And then he told OJ about after he heard these noises. It was around the same time that OJ was leaving for the airport.
Yes.
Blah, blah, blah. Before OJ leaves, he said, well, OJ seemed rushed, but he seemed like he was really in a good mood. He was no different than the OJ that I dealt with the whole time.
Yeah. Well, of course, and that goes to this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde version of OJ Simpson, where he's either a cold-blooded, calculating murderer, but he's also an idiot who drops every single piece of incriminating evidence.
And to believe that he did it, you have to believe that he's a master criminal, yet the dumbest person on the planet that's going to, oops, I dropped a glove here, oops, I dropped a glove there.
Yeah.
You have to believe that together to believe that he killed them, because in his car, in his Ford Bronco, the alleged car that he drove to the murder scene, only 1/8 of one drop of blood was ever found in that car. Let that sink in. 1/8 of one drop from a murder that's the world's three most respected criminologists in the world, Dr. Henry Lee, Dr. Michael Baden, and Dr. Cyril Wecht, all agree the killer would have been covered in blood. Yet only 1/8 of one drop of blood was ever found in his car. And on July 20th, 1994, D.A. Gil Garcetti told the press that there was no blood found in the plumbing at O.J. Simpson's home. So no blood in the drain traps, no blood under the washer. Van Etter and Lang refute the suggestion that there was this sweatsuit that Mark Furman found in the washing machine, which is in Mark Furman's book, Murder in Brentwood. He has this elaborate, I don't know what you called it, elaborate lie, about what he found in at OJ Simpson's house, but apparently never told anyone. There's all this speculation about a Swiss Army knife box that no one has ever seen. That there were these bloody fingerprints on the light switch by the maid's room, again, that he never told anyone about or never existed. And there was this dark sweatsuit in the washing machine that he's sure was the clothes that OJ wore to the murder, yet he never told anyone about them.
No, and they've never been brought up since,
To give you the level of investigator that Mark Furman was as a detective in the LAPD, his notes from June 12th, 1994, he took notes at the beginning of the case when he was the lead detective, the second detective on the case. He speculates that they might have been shot. I'm not kidding. In his notes, you will find that he speculates that the Ron Goldman and Nicole Simpson might have been victims of gunfire. I don't know how that explains Mrs. Simpson, the former Mrs. Simpson's head almost being cut off. I don't know a lot about guns, but I don't know if a gun can do that.
Well, which is funny about that is that then later he testified. Well, he testifies that from 2:50 to 4 a.m. he did no quote detecting since he was off the case. But Lieutenant Spangler asks him to view the crime scene from the pathway, and Furman identifies those are made with knives.
Apparently, by before 4 a.m. he figured out, this might have been a knife. Maybe someone told him that it was a knife.
Oh no, I'm just saying. It just right. He's all over the place. Also,
when you look at Mark Furman's role, one of the things that just keeps coming across is Furman says that he wasn't here, wasn't doing this, wasn't doing that, and people like the photographer, this Rokar, talks about, Furman was alone in the area that the crime occurred when I first saw him. But the sergeant that was at the scene with him, it could have been Spangler, or it could have been the guy that he went with in the car to the crime scene, testifies that he was with Furman the whole time, the entire time. And then Spangler was the officer in charge of the crime scene. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe he was the most sort of senior person on the scene.
And Spangler's the one that in his testimony, which I actually just saw the other day, he emphatically states that Furman was not alone at any time at that crime scene, and he also testifies that that picture with him pointing at the club was taken at 7:30 in the morning. So that tells you all you need to know about his credibility in terms of what he says and what actually happens.
That's a common problem when you start looking at this case. Is what's actually being said, and then what actually took place.
Absolutely.
And that's just sort of a constant throughout this.
And continuing to this day, where you have people, I hate more than anything, these talking head interviews, which is when whether a TV show or documentary, they feature these people recalling what happened at this event that they were involved in years and years ago. And often
Brian, hold on one sec. We got the commercial break coming up, but we'll come back in a little bit, and we'll finish talking about this, exploring some other ideas and maybe some theories as well. But stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Welcome to the world's meeting place. American.
It's practically narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio. Coming to you live from New York City. Your host, Pierce Redmond.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Oh, let me turn off my fan in the background. But welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. And just before we get started back up, Brian, I just wanted to say, if you are enjoying this format where you just have to listen to one commercial break, then please help support American Freedom Radio. You can donate, you can become a repeat donor. But everyone out there that enjoys this, that doesn't likes having a nice long chunk of uninterrupted conversation, then please do help support everybody over here at American Freedom Radio. And I've been tweeting it out a bunch, so I hope
Pierce, just to touch on the importance of something like American Freedom Radio, I have a great example of information getting suppressed. If not for American Freedom Radio, you wouldn't be hearing this material today. It was Memorial Day weekend, right after Ron Shipp in the OJ case. He was a former LAPD detective. He was a drunk who hasn't spoken to OJ since 1994. Well, he came out right before Memorial Day and said that OJ is going to confess when he gets released from prison. And this story was all over the news. It was all over the place. Every media outlet. So I methodically went through and I planned it out. And I had not yet released the LAPD interrogation of OJ Simpson, which again has never been heard, never been broadcast in full, never been available online prior to me putting it up. And I emailed it out to all of these media sources, and I was stunned by the amount of response that I got so quickly on Memorial Day itself. Because I had said in the email, if you would like the private link to view the interrogation, just email me back. So I sent it out, and I saw, I could tell by the analytics on Vimeo how many people were watching it. I was stunned how many people were spending time on their Memorial Day watching it. Do you know how many of those people pushed it out to their viewers, their readers or whatnot? How many of those major media corporations pushed it out?
I'm sure you're probably hard pressed to find even one of them.
Zero. Not even got back saying, oh, well, thanks, but we're going to pass on this. So to understand the importance of something like American Freedom Radio, while the mainstream media is pushing out some words that some guy said about a guy that he hasn't talked about in over 20 years, but hearing the guy, OJ Simpson's actual words being interrogated by the LAPD that's never been heard, they'll ignore. But American Freedom Radio, thankfully, there are outlets like this that will allow their listeners to have the source material that they really need, because people can soundbite anything to you. But if you can get your hands on the source material on whatever you're studying, whatever you're researching, whatever interests you, if you can get to the source material, that's going to tell you more than any media outlet will. And thanks to American Freedom Radio and people like you, Pierce, that information is able to get to people.
Yeah, no, it's on that particular thing. I remember when that came out, and that has become like this new trend when it comes to OJ. And I think it's in part, it's been 20 years since the murders and the FX show. There's this renewed interest suddenly, but we keep getting these stupid. They found a knife. They found a knife on OJ's property. Now apparently
I said to someone that day, I said, I will bet my paycheck that that knife has nothing to do with the case.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is, and again, anyone that doesn't know, this is the knife that was allegedly found after OJ moved out of Rockingham, and they were digging up the land around there, and some guy found it, brought it home, never told anybody about it until 20 years later, way past statute of limitations. There's not going to be any evidence on this. It's just a knife that was found.
And that information came out the first week that the FX show dropped in ratings, dropped in total viewers, was the same week that the knife story came out. And the next week, ratings were back up.
Oh, yeah. No, exactly. It's like these little silly planted stories. And it's all this, OJ's going to talk. OJ's going to talk. Look, he's never, ever done. I mean, let's be clear. OJ is a bit of a nut. Obviously, he wrote a book.
OJ is a reprehensible human being just solely for the fact that he is a domestic abuser.
Sure.
Anything I say is not because I enjoy OJ. It's because, it's the truth. OJ is a reprehensible, anyone that hits their partner, in my mind, is a disgusting human being. And I think that anyone, all these people that are arrested for domestic abuse, we should hold as pariahs the same way that we hold OJ and Ray Rice. But when we separate that from the fact of, did he kill people? It's a completely different story. Saying that he didn't kill saying and proving that he didn't kill anyone is not saying, oh, this is a great guy that, he's not Nordberg anymore.
No, I know, and I that's an aspect within the OJ research community that is a little troubling at times. He's an angel, or on the more extreme side, he's some sort of whistleblower. He tried to tell people about what was really going on, but he had to keep quiet to protect everybody. And I think that
OJ knew the government secrets. There's a film on my Vimeo, which is vimeo.com/Brian Heiss, Heiss, and it's 100 celebrities that have been arrested for domestic abuse. I would encourage everyone to go and watch that. It's a 5-minute film, and you'll be stunned by the people that you'll see who have been arrested for domestic abuse that have been given a free pass. And again, it comes down to media accountability, what the media will share with you and what they'll keep from you.
Mm. Oh, and let's be clear, too. Some of the people in that video are serial abusers. As OJ is...
One of them performed last night at the Democratic Convention. Paul Simon. Paul Simon was arrested for domestic abuse, and I watched that closely because none of the commentators mentioned his arrest. If Ray Rice, who has the same criminal record as Paul Simon technically, was up there speaking at any convention, I don't imagine that they'd forget that he, beat his wife in that elevator.
Yeah, right. No. And just on the OJ thing, there is only one documented time of physical abuse.
And that's a great point, Pierce. That is a phenomenal point.
Even Nicole admits that, in the divorce proceedings, everything, she could have brought up whatever she wanted to.
That is an excellent point, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because one of the things that people need to understand is that the California Open Records Act of 1968 includes all police blotter information. So California Open Records Act of 1968, which demands that when a police officer comes to your house and it's whether it's radioed in or whether it's called in, there's a log that keeps these documentation. During the criminal trial of OJ Simpson, the prosecution kept talking about these 8 incidences of police showing up at OJ's house. However, there was no documentation to back that up. There was only one other incident that was noted, and that was after the domestic abuse incident in 1989 when Mr. Simpson and his wife, Nicole, had a squabble on New Year's after a New Year's Eve party, and the police were called to the scene. OJ pled no contest to that, but while they were investigating it, the district attorney's office asked that the detective in charge investigate any other incidences, any other incidents where police might have shown up to the Simpson home where there might have been a squabble or domestic abuse or whatnot. Now, out of all the officers that were asked at the station, and they went back 5 years and checked out all the officers that were working at that station at the time, only one officer came forward with an incident, and that officer happened to be, any guesses, Pierce?
Was it Furman?
It was Mark Furman, shockingly.
Yeah.
Mark Furman talking about an incident where it's not really clear if he was called to the house or if he kind of got there, and OJ was bashing the windshield of a car that he owned with a baseball bat while yelling at his wife at the time, and he made no arrests.
Yeah, and this is the famous incident which Mark Furman said left an indelible impression on him. And
but that's the only incident. That's the only incident of abuse that the prosecution, and keep in mind, how many people work in the LA County District Attorney's Office? Is it 250 or 500 lawyers? And they had all the resources of the District Attorney's Office available for this case, yet not one additional incident was found prior to the 89 incident. Now, it's important to note that after the 89 incident, OJ Simpson went to his attorney, Skip Taft, and he asked that there be an addendum to his prenuptial agreement that stated if he lays a hand on Nicole or abuses her in any way again, that the prenuptial agreement is null and void, meaning that in a state like California, she would get 50% of his assets. In 1993, when the couple divorced, there is no claim or no allegation of any additional abuse in the divorce proceedings. Now, why would Mrs. Simpson not mention another incident of abuse if it had occurred in those divorce proceedings when she was so diligent about putting the documentation of the 1989 incident in her safe deposit box? Why would she not document additional incidents so when she had divorced her abuser, she would receive half of his estate? It just logically doesn't,
Oh, and I think this also, again, because if we go with the sort of general media's portrayal, that again, OJ is Othello, then
yes, because he's the one Shakespeare character that's black.
Yeah, right. And he has to be evil, because it discounts everything. The fact that Nicole and OJ were still close, that he visited, Juditha and Lou Brown, Nicole's parents, invited OJ the day of the murders to go out to dinner with them.
The fact that
Juditha even years later
are still friends with OJ.
Yeah, exactly. No, and even to this day, the Browns are not. They still talk to OJ.
Well, and OJ has said that the reason that the Browns sued him along with the Goldmans is to protect the financial viability of Justin and Sydney, OJ's children with Nicole, because if they did not enter that lawsuit, the Goldmans could have gotten everything.
Oh, and they I understand. And Ron Goldman was brutally murdered.
It was horrific.
But
and
the Goldman family has certainly made a pretty penny off of his murder, and there's something shady going on with that family.
A lot of people point to the book If I Did It, which was written by Pablo Fenves, who was the ghostwriter hired by Judith Regan of Regan Books at the time when it was still in business, to write this book, quote unquote, with OJ Simpson, detailing the murders. Now, remember the Goldmans sued and they got the rights to the book. However, people always overlook that in 1997 and numerous other times, Fred Goldman on national television made an offer that if OJ Simpson would come forward and publish in several newspapers a full confession, that he would forget about the wrongful death settlement. Meaning that if OJ confessed to committing these murders, the wrongful death, the millions and millions of dollars that he received from that jury would be null and void. Mm-hmm. Now, OJ allegedly, although Pablo Fenves is on record as having written that chapter, OJ allegedly wrote a confession, and that didn't stop the Goldmans from, moving forward and suing him for it, although Fred had gone on record. And interestingly enough, the Ron Goldman Foundation for Justice, although Kim Goldman purports it to still exist, it hasn't existed in the eyes of the IRS or the state of California as a 501c3 nonprofit since 2012. Yet she's still going around accepting quote-unquote donations, which aren't tax deductible, although she's purporting them to be, to this day. But what people, I hate to trash the Goldmans, but when one looks at Ron Goldman's night on June 12th and just looks at the facts that we know, it becomes clear that Orenthal James Simpson didn't kill Ron Goldman. Do you want to talk about that a little, Pierce? Do you think people are ready for that?
Yeah, no. I was going to say let's get into that because it's funny. I think people they forget that there were two victims. Nicole is of course is the beautiful, wife and with the loving children and all of that. And Ronald Goldman
Goldman wasn't a bad-looking guy. He was on Studs, for goodness sake.
Oh, no. Yeah, Ron Goldman was a good-looking guy as well. I think it's just he is definitely overshadowed, which is interesting. Absolutely. That his family will play that up. Oh, nobody cares. But if you start looking into who Ronald Goldman is, well, isn't that odd? He's got a 6-inch criminal file that's protected by the LAPD because he was a confidential informant. Well, right. What was Ronald Goldman informing on? But why is his police file not being distributed to the media?
Before we go there, how about we take people just through the fact by fact of what we can prove? Because yes, we can prove that he was a confidential informant. That is a fact. But there are great conversations about what that could have been about and whatnot that we absolutely can and should have.
Yes.
But first, don't we need to really just lay out the facts and show them that, this guy probably wasn't killed by OJ Simpson, or definitely wasn't killed by OJ Simpson, simply looking at, and the reason I say that is because no one's ever taken the time to look at Ron Goldman's night. And I came across some things, and, this timeline, which again will be available to your listeners on your site, has, I've been doing a verbal version of it for like 15 years.
No, well, let's get into that, because we've got the sort of, again, the official story is that after Juditha and Lou Brown left Mezzaluna, and Nicole and her kids, they left as well. They went in separate directions. We get this report, or this phone call back to Mezzaluna.
At 9:37.
Well, actually, I wanted to. I wonder, do you buy the idea that the Brown family made it back by 9:37? Because I know that there's.
I didn't for a while, but here's why I tell you. And I had this same talk with Ed Opperman about it, because. There used to be this, it's still around, these Usenet was, before the internet was all pretty like it is now, there was this Usenet, and there was this alternate fan OJ Simpson site with all of these people discussing the case. It's one of the most maddening things that you could ever read in your life. You will just, your head will spin. You'll get headaches just listening to these people, reading these people bicker back and forth from 20 years ago.
The no J's and the pro J's.
I don't know. Yeah. Pierce, I still don't know which one is which.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And, these are some lunatics that I'm reading. And although some of them have valuable information sometimes, but one of the biggest lunatics is this man, Dick Wagner, who is no longer with us. But he did something, and he had it on his site. It's the only legitimate piece of information I ever saw on his site, because he actually documents, he had a person with him in the car. They did a mile by mile documentation of their trip from Mezzaluna on a Sunday night at 8:30 to the Brown home in Dana Point, California. And they made it with like 10 minutes to spare.
Well, I only bring it up because I know that T.H. Johnson, in Pursuit of Exhibit 35, he goes into it quite a bit, and he points out the fact that there was a lot of construction going on all up and down, near Dana Point.
They were building the high occupancy lanes, but what he leaves out, and Wagner points it out in his timeline, is that construction had finished on the part of the Pacific Coast Highway that the Browns had taken. It was pretty much a free ride, and Wagner points out that the HOV lanes and the regular lanes were pretty much the same speed at that time. I haven't seen T.H. Johnson's, mile by mile with, this was what the car odometer said at this time. This is what the speed that we were going, and this is the mile point, that marker that we were at. And I would love to. I'm open to that idea. But I also saw recently Karen Crawford's testimony on February 7th. I saw the video of that, and and it's where they have that stipulation about the phone bill. But the prosecution puts up a blow up of the actual phone bill, and the times added. They matched the times that the calls were alleged to have taken place, and Crawford verified yes at 9:37. But what I did is I examined that blow up a little more, and the times below it, the numbers that they were calling from, because I was able to figure out what OJ's cell number was, and the numbers that they were calling out to at the times that they were calling out to matched up. So when they were calling OJ's phone number in the morning, it matched up to the times that he alleged to have called them. So I think
that's an. I guess I would say the only to rebut that is just that the actual phone record, the GT phone records, at least for Nicole, were never actually entered into trial. Instead, a poster board of a photograph of them, which is the old. And I guess it's just the original. Lou Brown said she called him at 11. Then it's 10:30.
Absolutely.
Then it becomes 9:30. I mean, I
don't dismiss that possibility, but I would love to see a mile by mile. I would love to see the same kind of triptych for from like a T.H. Johnson or someone else who could recreate the conditions the way the Wagner did, and if I saw that, I would totally be open to it. But I think that it makes it. I think it gets.
It almost doesn't really matter because let's just go by your timeline, Brian. Even if we have it that the Browns make it back to 9:37, it still doesn't make any sense. And your timeline is just one of many. There's a lot. There are variations let's go through yours.
Absolutely.
What happens?
Just for background, this timeline that I put together only uses facts and evidence, witness testimony at trial, and I tried to use the earliest testimony. So a lot of times you'll see their grand jury testimony because I tend to believe that people remember things best right after it happens and not months later. I tried not to. You won't find any theory or any scenarios in the timeline. I just tried to go very factual. There's a teeny tiny bit of science, and it asks you to use a little bit of common sense at one point. But I just tried to document out what this guy was doing. So clocks out at 9:33. Signs the time card. 9:37. Mrs. Brown, Nicole's mom, calls the restaurant. They just had dinner there earlier that night. She forgot her eyeglasses. Now, it does get weird that when the manager, Karen Crawford, finds the glasses in a gutter by the sidewalk. But it's the same place that they, when you drop off and pick up people from a restaurant, the car would drive up. That's where you would get in and out. But it's just odd that she would look there. She must be a really good manager because, when I worked at restaurants as a kid, I can't imagine any of my managers going that extra mile to look outside, especially on a Sunday night.
Well, so Mezzaluna is an expensive, trendy restaurant. Nicole was well known there. Maybe
True. And I did find it weird when Karen Crawford said that she recognized Mrs. Brown's voice. Yeah, that's odd. But she does have kind of an accent, so maybe. 9:45, Nicole calls Mezzaluna. Again, Karen Crawford recognizes the voice because Karen Crawford's the greatest manager in the history of restaurants because she'll go outside and find your glasses and know the voices of all the customers. She asks for Ron. She talks to Ron, and after he gets off the phone with Nicole, he tells Crawford that he's going to drop off the glasses. And then he mentions that after work, he's going to the Baja Cantina. He's going to meet some guys from work at the Baja Cantina. Now, a lot of times people will think, oh, Baja Cantina, that sounds like a chain restaurant that I can get a burrito pretty fast, or that sounds like a national franchise restaurant where I can go and they'll sing my birthday in Spanish and they'll clap their hands and give me a sombrero. But it's not. Actually, the Baja Cantina was known in the 90s, in 94 specifically, as Los Angeles's Sunday night hotspot. It was a place that celebrities would mingle with, folks from the beach. It was the hotspot. He wasn't going to like some little corner dive bar. He was going to the city's Sunday night hotspot. That's something that no one's ever really understood. That was his plans for the night. It wasn't going out, we're going to go have a couple drinks with folks from work. He was driving 16 to 24 minutes in a borrowed car to go to the city's Sunday night hotspot. Right? Pierce, when you go to a bar, if you're going to, your local corner bar, you're you're not going to get as gussied up as you're going to get if you're going to the city's Sunday night hotspot, right?
Mm. Oh, and let's keep in mind, too, Ronald Goldman, former club promoter, worked at the Dragonfly.
He was a model.
Model.
Lots of his friends
Dragonfly did a...
die in tragic ways.
Yes, exactly. Connected to drugs.
So he gets off the phone. Now, when he leaves Mezzaluna, again, these are key points because, again, first of all, they've never been investigated, but it tells you so much about the time that these people were killed. Karen Crawford says 9:50, but she didn't see him leave. John DeBello, who's another manager at Mezzaluna, talked to Ron for 15 to 20 minutes after he clocked him out by signing his time card. He clocked him out at 9:33. So that's 9:53, 9:48. But then after they finished their conversation, he saw Ron speaking with other employees before leaving. So I think the earliest we could put Ron leaving Mezzaluna is 9:55, right? Mm-hmm. At the very earliest. And I always try to go with the earliest times. 10 p.m. he gets home. One of the biggest myths that we're going to just blow away now is that Ron Goldman could make it home within a minute of leaving Mezzaluna. It is 1/5 of 1 mile from Mezzaluna to Ron Goldman's house. It takes the average man 4 minutes to walk 1/5 of 1 mile, and they didn't have to deal with the light at Gorham and San Vicente. San Vicente is a 4-lane road. Gorham's more of a side street. Ron had to cross against traffic, so he probably had to wait a little bit at the light. So he gets home, and, there are some facts that we know that Ron Goldman did when he got home. Again, he was going to the city's Sunday hotspot. Obviously, he took off his uniform. He picked out an outfit to wear. He got dressed. A former studs contestant, model, and club promoter, he almost certainly brushed his teeth, flossed, did his hair, got freshened up. Pierce, have you ever worked in a restaurant?
I have not, but
okay. As someone that's waited
I know
tables,
many people that do.
Yeah, I waited tables as a kid, and I remember the first thing you wanted to do when you got off work is to get the restaurant smell off of you, regardless. Whether it was the nicest, whether it was the country club that I worked at the time, or whether it was like a bar that I worked at. You just wanted to get the smell of the restaurant off of you, especially if you're going to the city's Sunday hotspot. But, what we can establish about Ron Goldman is he wasn't racing against time, as the prosecution suggested, to get to Nicole's house. Because if he was, he should have just walked from Mezzaluna to Nicole's house and then walked home, because it would have taken less time than doing what Ron did by going back to his house, freshening up or whatnot, borrowing a car, and then driving to Nicole's. Actually, it would have taken less time just to walk there from Mezzaluna and then walk home. Could have done it faster. So just keep that in mind. So he wasn't in a rush to get home. No one's ever mentioned this before, but it was kind of mentioned at trial. And this is probably the most important thing that you're going to hear, is Ron Goldman ate when he got home. He took time to eat a salad, spinach salad, when he got home. Why do we know this? Because 200 milligrams of spinach was found in his stomach when he was killed. Multiple Mezzaluna employees testified that they did not see Ron eat while he was at work at any time. It's great that he ate spinach, because the interesting thing about spinach, it's one of the most digestible foods. It'll digest faster than a lot of foods. Within 40 minutes of you putting spinach in your mouth and starting to chew it, the spinach will have moved through the first 4 stages of digestion and will be in your small intestine, being absorbed and moving it forward in the digestive process after it had left the stomach. Ron Goldman was killed within 40 minutes of when he put that spinach in his mouth. That's important to know, because if it was later than 40 minutes, the food would have been in his small intestine. So again, just going by this timeline that we know he ate, I say at a minimum, we can prove, based on the activities that we listed and giving him time to eat, Goldman spent a minimum of 25 to 30 minutes at home. It's 5 minutes to drive to Nicole's, 1 minute to find parking, and then 1 minute to walk from the car to the front gate at Nicole's house. A lot of people think that, the attack was going on when Ron Goldman got there. Here's why that's not true. Detective Tom Lang discovered that the buzzer was broken. And what I mean by that is, at Nicole's condo, she had an intercom system that So, someone shows up at her gate, they hit the buzzer to let them know that they're there, they've arrived, and then you could hit the intercom and talk to the person at your gate, and then you can release the mechanism, release the lock to let that person in, except the buzzer that released the lock for Nicole's house was broken. She had to walk outside to open the gate. I rather doubt that if Mr. Simpson was murdering his ex-wife, he would stop to open the gate for a visitor.
Yep. And that also, just to jump in real quick, that also goes, this whole idea that, OJ stole the keys to, the condo, but,
He could have jumped the fence.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No. Yeah, none of that makes any sense. Well, and he was hiding in the bushes for how long?
Sure. And certainly Ron Goldman could have jumped the fence. No one's saying that he couldn't have. But one of the key points that everyone loses sight of is there's only one of these. In the Simpson trial, if folks don't remember, there was all of this hubbub about what time someone heard the barking of a dog.
Yeah.
And they were trying to tie the barking of the dog to a murder, which is smart on a lot of levels because, when you first hear the dog, something's going on. There's something's amiss in the neighborhood. There's only one witness whose time that she heard the dogs is documented by undeniable proof. Her phone bill. Denise Pilnack was a neighbor of Nicole's who had spent the day with her mother, who was visiting from out of town and staying at her sister's house, blah, 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 blah. She had a friend that was using her computer because it was a time that not everyone had computers in 1994. And the mom had just left and she's looking to kick the friend out of the house. And she kicks the friend out of the house. They go down to Denise Pilnack's porch. They say their goodbyes. They make small talk. And they both comment how quiet the neighborhood is that night. Denise Pilnack goes back inside at 10:25, calls her mom to make sure she got home okay to her sister's house. Talks to her for 3 minutes, again, documented by the phone bill. Pilnack then brushes her teeth, flosses, and then looks through some papers, and that incredibly silent, quiet night, that eerily quiet night, comes to an abrupt end when at 10:34 she first hears the dog barking, which matches up perfectly with Ron Goldman arriving there at 10:31. The world's three leading criminologists agree that it was a prolonged struggle, the murders. So if the murders first started at 10:34, and Dr. Michael Baden says that they lasted for 10 to 15 minutes. That puts it ending at 10:44 or 10:49. It's a 7-minute drive from Nicole's to OJ's. Certainly you could make it back faster, but if you had just murdered two people, you're covered in blood, you still have the murder weapon in the car, I'm going to guess that you're probably going to be driving with your hands at 10 and 2 and the speed limit rather than speeding throughout the neighborhood to rush like a maniac to get home where you could get pulled over by the police. And by the way, Jill Shively's a liar. We can go into that later.
Yeah.
She's the least credible person on the planet. 10:40 to 10:45, Cato hears 3 thumps. 11:55, Alan Parks sees a dark figure. And by the way, OJ would have gotten home between 10:44 and 10:49, but 3 thumps at 10:40 to 10:45, that's a little curious. 10:55, Alan Parks sees the dark figure. 11 p.m., OJ's ready to leave for the airport. It takes 26 minutes to drive from Rockingham to LAX. Throughout the whole trip, OJ had the divider between the driver and the passenger down and was conversing with the driver, who got lost and failed to make a turn on the way to the airport. OJ's bags are checked at 11:32 by the SkyCap for American Airlines. So consider this. In 22 minutes, from 10:34 to 10:55, 10:56, OJ had to murder 2 people, a prolonged struggle. Ron and Nicole both have defensive wounds all over their body, especially Ron, whose knuckles show that many of his punches connected with his assailant. They both put up a major fight. This is documented even by the prosecution's witnesses. And it's known that Ron connected with punches and kicks. Yet on June 13th, when the LAPD photographed Mr. Simpson, he has no bruises anywhere on his body. OJ had to travel home. Again, the world's 3 most respected criminologists say that he would have been covered in blood, yet he only leaves 1/8 of 1 drop of blood in the Bronco. He had to wash blood off of his body. Pierce, have you ever gotten blood on your body?
Yeah.
It's a little harder to wash blood off your body. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he had to wash blood off his body. But, again, according to Garcetti, on July 20th, 1994, he had no blood found in the pipes and the drain traps at his house, or in the washing machine drain traps at his house. So he had to magically wash the blood off his body somewhere that the residue has never been found. He had to clean the tub because, if you have a white tub and you get, washing blood off, that tends to get on the sides of things and whatnot.
He had a white carpet.
The carpeting throughout his house was white, like his women. And he had to, I guess he either levitated up his stairs, or I don't know how he got up his stairs. Again, covered in blood. He had to get up the stairs without leaving any marks, any traces of blood or dirt or the berries from the crime scene that he had just allegedly murdered 2 people. His first murder that we know of, allegedly. So then if he got some stains on the carpeting, he had to clean those up, right? He had to dry off. He had to dispose of the murder weapons, bloody clothes, and
which have never been found.
Glove, and the towel that he used to dry off, which have never been found. He had to clean the blood and the dirt that he tracked into the house. He had to dress for his trip, transform into a generally happy, personable, and mood, and maintain it until the LAPD notified him. And he had to do everything that I talked about, from washing the blood to transforming, within 5 minutes.
And that, and be clear, that's the story that the prosecution is trying to sell.
Huh. And
that he did this in 5-6 minutes.
Did you know that OJ's little Sydney Simpson, who was, 10 at the time, 11 at the time? She had a friend sleeping over that night.
Mm-hmm. Did
you know that? Rachel Berman. And it's kind of weird that Mr. Berman,
takes the kid in the middle of the night.
Well, it was not the middle. I don't know.
Well, early, yeah.
I don't know if you're eating the early bird special, Pearson, going to bed by 8 p.m., but he took the bed at 9:30.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess it's still,
But Mr. Robert Berman kind of came out of nowhere and said this is after the girl eats dinner and goes to Ben and Jerry's with the family, with the Brown family. Mr. Robert Berman shows up at 9:15 and they leave by 9:30. But OJ didn't know this. OJ didn't know that his daughter's sleepover party had been canceled. So I don't have kids, but I imagine that kids stay up late when they have sleepover parties. Mm-hmm. And I know that Nicole's living room is like where the TV was and everything. And it also has a great big window, which looks right out on where they were killed. So do you really think that no matter how volatile Mr. Simpson might have been that night, they would murder his wife and a friend with his child potentially having a front row seat to the murder? Oh, look, there's daddy murdering mommy. It's preposterous. Yeah. It's absolutely preposterous.
Well, and even they, no one is saying that, even the sort of anti-OJ people never say he's a bad father. Well, he might be a bad husband, but they are not going to go to, oh yeah, he would murder his wife in front of his children, or just a positive. Even so, just the mere fact that his kids are in the house. Yeah. Forget the friend for a minute. You really think? I mean, then he is the most cold-blooded person we've ever seen. He's going to kill the mother of his children while they're upstairs.
Yeah, I guess makes sense to them. It makes sense to a lot of people. Is the scary part. Pierce, why is it that in every quote-unquote documentary, every dramatization, every person that goes on telling about this case, arguing that he is guilty, why is it that it is impossible for them to do so without including discredited, debunked, and false information?
Oh, no, I mean, it's a theme.
But you cannot find any of these portrayals or these documentaries that do not include information that has been proven to be false, not speculatively false, factually false. And why is it that you can't tell the story of his guilt without including all of these scenarios that have been proven to be false, yet in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, we were just able to walk you through just the documented facts of that night?
Oh, you mentioned earlier, Brian, that Jill Shively, who people will know from the FX show. She's this woman that claims to have seen OJ driving in a white Bronco, running a red light. Now, the prosecution they'll claim that they couldn't use her story because she sold it to hard copy. But the only problem with that is that she swore up and down on a stack of Bibles that she saw OJ run the red light at 10:50. Well, he's supposed to be crashing into Cato's air conditioner at 10:40.
Yes. Well, he drove back he had crashed into the air conditioner, and then he got in the car and drove back to that intersection.
Yeah, right, exactly, to run a red light.
But let's be honest. What people always miss about the Shively story, and it's right out, the fact of the matter is all of this information is out there. You just have to kind of search for it. Shively didn't give her police report the morning of June 13th. She did it a day later after Mr. Simpson's Bronco had been all over the news in shots that you could clearly see his license plate number, because they always talk about Jill Shively's credibility because she knew 5 of the 6 numbers on his license plate. However, that had been photographed all day long by the media and on every network news. And let me tell you something I've never told anyone. It's kind of my ace in the hole, but I'll share it with you and your audience. Did you ever see the documentary June 17th, 1994, ESPN did?
No. Oh, yeah. It's a great documentary. Archival, right?
Yeah, it's the archival footage.
Yeah, it's very good.
I think it's phenomenal. However, I also have footage from that documentary that was in the final film. Why is Jill Shively outside of OJ's house on June 17th, 1994 in the crowd of onlookers?
I did not notice that.
Well, no one did. I saw it when I picked it up. I've never mentioned it to anyone, but now you and your audience know that there's a shot. I'll send you the footage, Pierce, of Jill Shively outside of OJ's house on June 17th, 1994, which again was before she testified to the grand jury. And only 2 days or 3 days after she, wrote down the numbers that she saw on TV on his license plate and made up this scenario about being in this confrontation with OJ and the driver of a Nissan that no one's ever found and has never come forward. She is the least credible. And so is this Skip Junis, is a man that NBC likes to roll out, who was, he alleged to have seen OJ at the airport putting the murder weapon in a garbage can.
Which was never found.
Well, Skip Junis didn't come forward until January 1995. But more importantly, LAPD had went through all of the LAX garbage system and the landfills that that garbage was brought to, searching for this alleged murder weapon. They never found it. They did searches of Chicago and never found it. Now, the new hip thing to talk about is, Kardashian hit it. Kardashian hit it with the bag. It's preposterous.
Kim Kardashian herself admits that she did go into the bag and she didn't see anything.
And she's probably...
not that she's the most credible witness, but I'm just saying, it's...
But I think that she's right on this, because we have to use logic, which I know a lot of people hate to do, and it scares a lot of people. But so you've been informed that the police want you to come back from, your wife whose head was pretty much chopped off, the love of your life. You come back right away. Are you going to take that bag with your bloody clothes and the murder weapon on the plane with you, and knowing that police probably will be meeting you? We'll be meeting you at the gate of your flight to take you into custody, potentially for questioning, and take all of your belongings into custody for questioning. I mean, for Christ's sakes, he didn't know that they weren't going to be at the gate in Chicago wanting to get him for questioning and detaining him. The idea that he's going through two sets of metal detectors with a huge knife and bloody clothes is just ludicrous.
Yeah. We should also mention again the original autopsy report by Dr. Goldman states that 2 knives were used, meaning 2 assailants, not just one.
Barry Scheck and Dr. Henry Lee also agree with that there were multiple assailants.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And again, okay, even if OJ was one of them, well, who's the other guy? And I'll just point out again too, with the Jill Shively.
It was Charlie. It was Charlie.
With the and the seeing the white Bronco. I think it's worth noting Al Cowlings also had a white Bronco. Al Cowlings, very mixed up with some very nefarious characters, along with OJ. Joey Ippolito. And yeah, Al Cowlings was an occasional bodyguard for Joey Ippolito. Joey Ippolito, for anyone that doesn't know, very powerful mobster involved in cocaine trafficking, and famously escaped weeks before the murders took place.
And wasn't Denise Brown dating one of his associates?
Yep, she was dating a guy by his nickname was called the Animal. He was he sounds
like a nice fella. Kind of guy that you want to bring home to mom.
He even testified, I believe, at the trial.
We
dated.
There were two informants that testified that Van Adder said, Detective Phil Van Adder said that when they went to Rockingham initially, they looked at OJ as a suspect. Again, another lie from the very. I know it's shocking that the LAPD would lie about anything. I know people are probably stunned listening. That, oh my goodness, the LAPD would lie? You're kidding?
Yeah. Oh, and again, Ippolito and Cowling have the same lawyer, Donald Ree, who is a former partner of Weitzman, who is OJ Simpson's former lawyer. But just back to
you want to talk about same lawyers and weird, what's up with that? Mark Furman and Fred Goldman.
Yeah, I know.
Had Robert Tortolo was their lawyer, which is very weird, especially considering that every time that Fred went out and had a quote unquote press conference, which I do include one in the film, which I enjoy because it makes me laugh. He did so after there was an incident with Fuhrman. Every time. Or he was signaled by Marsha Clark to do a press conference to distract from what actually happened in court.
Oh, I know, and of course, and Goldman goes through, the real racist is OJ, and this is after Fuhrman.
Tortolo, the lawyer for Mark Furman and Fred Goldman, said this jury was a bunch of racists. I think they did something to help. They think they did something to help the brothers, but they hurt themselves. I mean, it's appalling. Yeah, those juries were treated. But you going back to the Ippolito and the lawyers?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I mean, we could do a whole podcast. Obviously, Brian, we'll have to have you back on to get into some of this stuff. But I was just saying, again, with the Broncos stuff, believe me, looking at Al Cowlings, he's dirty as the day is long. He's got a white Bronco. Now, there's also Marcus Allen, who's another NFL star. He was referred to as the young OJ. Now, according to, a slew of Nicole's friends, including Resnick, Cora Fishman, and others, Marcus Allen and Nicole were having some sort of relationship, sexual at the time.
Well, you're absolutely right.
And he's got a white Bronco. Now, and yes, he's got a white Bronco, and even more so, there were a couple of witnesses who claimed to have seen Nicole embracing a black male outside of her apartment some point before Goldman shows up. Was that Marcus Allen? Was he driving around in a white Bronco? I mean, so now just to say,
it's a good question.
And again, we've got 3 big black NFL players all driving around with white Broncos. Could you imagine? Maybe to the the unseeing eye, you see a black guy in a white Bronco. Oh, it's OJ. It's very easy to fall into that mentality.
Well, the most interesting thing about the Simpson saga is that once you can, which I think we have, once you can establish that unless Simpson is the only human being known in the span of humanity to be able to control the time-space continuum, he didn't kill anyone, it opens the door to so much really, really interesting scenarios, really, really interesting and fascinating to explore possibilities that there is a lot of evidence. Every scenario that you've mentioned so far, I cannot dispute any of them. And that is really interesting. When you think of, well, you can't debunk, any of these different scenarios. well, that's just interesting on the surface.
Well,
Because
again,
it makes it a possibility.
Yeah, and I think again it all goes back to when Furman finds the glove, the investigation ends, and the quote trial begins, because once they find the glove, oh well, that's it. It has to be OJ. OJ's the guilty one. So we're not going to look into the fact that the police procedure is completely broken, but we're not going to look into the fact that all of these three principals, know a whole bunch of shady individuals. Anyway, Brian, we're reaching the end. Where can people go to find out about this film and information on it?
You can find me on twitter.com/Brian Heiss or at OJ Veritas.
Excellent. And Brian, we're definitely going to have you back on the show again soon to cover some more of this stuff, because we just scratched the surface. But anyway, thank you all so much for listening to Porkins Policy Radio. I have been your host, Pierce Redmond. Thank you to AFR for having me on the show and having this new show. And I will be talking to you all very soon.
No rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio.